Hi everybody, Tim Hughes here. I'm the CEO and co-founder of DLA Ignite. With me today, I've got Andrew Likierman, and we're going to be talking about his new book, Judgment at Work, Making Better Choices. Andrew, thank you so much for coming on today. Where can people find you?
Okay, I'm at the London Business School, and if you want a email address, it's alikierman, that's ALIKIERMAN @london.edu.
Andrew, thank you so much for coming on and talking to us about your book. I really loved it. I thought it's a fantastic book, and it is all about how to make better judgment. And you go through it in a really thorough way. What was the inspiration behind the book?
Well, I've spent some of my life in academic life. I've spent some of it in commercial life, and I've spent some of it in public service. And in each of these fields, what's been clear is that judgment is a quality which is incredibly valuable, especially for anybody who wants to manage or lead something. And I was intrigued about why there was so little about this written, why people weren't working on it. Granted, it seemed to me particularly important as a quality for people to have and perhaps to learn about. So I did a bit of inquiring and discovered there was virtually nothing on this. And
I've
so
never
I thought,
seen another book on it.
No, I tell you why, because it's a really tough thing to look at, and you've got to have quite a lot of patience. And I was so interested and so intrigued by it. I thought this is something really worth studying.
Because you break down judgment into a number of particular areas. Just showing that to the audience.
Yeah.
And you break it into several elements. Do you want to just walk us through how those your judgment framework?
Absolutely. So look, I'm afraid for those who like things in threes, it's got 6 elements. So I apologize for that, but it's a little bit more complicated and needs slightly more elements to it. But actually, my view would be that doing any of these things is better than doing none. So you don't have to do all 6. The more, the better, it seems to me, in terms of the chances of stacking the cards in your favor and making a good choice. So here they are. The first one is the relevant knowledge and experience you've got.
Yep.
That's to say, when we come to make a choice, we have lots of knowledge about lots of things. The question is, how much knowledge have we got about this? And so if you haven't got relevant knowledge and experience, you need to get some or to find someone who has. So number 1, relevant knowledge and experience. Number 2 is awareness. Awareness of what's going on in terms of the choice that's being made. Now, I mean, I use an analogy here of me cycling around central London. You know, on a bike, bluntly, you've got to be very aware of what's going on around you. Otherwise, you'll get knocked off.
Yeah.
So being aware of, in a meeting, what the dynamics are, the body language, what people are not saying, and so on, that in itself is really important as part of the process of making a judgment. That's number 2. Number 3 is about who and what you trust, because you're getting information from people, from the internet, from ChatGPT. Question is, do you trust what they're telling you? And even in the case of ChatGPT, wonderful though it is in so many ways, it's not always right, because it partly depends, of course, on whether you're asking it the right question. So who and what you trust is number 3. And coming back to people, as it were, we rely a lot on other people in our lives. Some of them we know are more reliable and some less. So number 4 is about our feelings and our beliefs. That's to say, what is it actually? How do we approach this? Do we feel good about it? Do we feel not good? Do we feel angry? Do we feel afraid? You know, do we have biases? Do we have what kind of frame of mind are we in when we make a choice of this kind? And how do we filter the information that's coming into us? So feelings and beliefs, number 4. And then there's the question of how we actually make the choice. People come to you and they say, look, you can do this or you can do this. Well, that may or may not be true. There may be a third alternative they haven't given you. there may be other ways of approaching the problem. So the way you make the choice is the fifth key element of the framework. Then finally, we've got the question for decisions about delivery. All right, you made a great choice and all that. Is it actually feasible? Now, I would argue that if you make a great choice, it has to be feasible as well. So it's no use saying great in theory, doesn't work in practice. So there are the 6 elements of the framework.
You also mention the Thinking in Bets book, which I'm trying to remember the
Annie Duke.
Annie Duke's book, where she says that you can make great decisions, but they may have bad outcomes, or you can make bad decisions and they can have good outcomes.
Yeah. Well, look, I mean, as far as I think it's a great book, by the way.
It's a fantastic book. Yeah.
Thinking in Bets, really, really interesting. Now, as far as I'm concerned, for me, it's about, as I say, stacking the cards in your favor. And, where she talks a lot about cards, so it's an appropriate.
Yes. So those that don't know, Annie Duke, who wrote the book, is a
professional
worldwide poker player.
Yeah, exactly. So look, as yes, she's right. But what I'm talking about here is, how do you try and make sure that you have the best chances of getting what you want? Now, luck, which she talks a lot about, may get in the way. You may do all the right things, and then bluntly, you are unlucky. Russia invades Ukraine, COVID breaks out. I don't know. Anyway, lots of other things.
But the luck also goes the other way, because you talk about luck in about running a bookshop.
Yeah.
And which didn't make a lot of money, and then a developer basically offered you lots of money for the bookshop, and it's now a tower block.
Exactly so. So there you are. There's a great example. All right. This example was, I was chairman of a chain of bookshops. We never made money. Somebody wanted to develop the site where in the city of London, where one of our bookshops was. We made a fortune on it. All right. Was this a great success on selling books? No, it was incredibly lucky. So what I'm saying is, there isn't a necessary correlation between doing the right thing and getting what you want, because life can get in between. But what I am saying is, if you want to have the best possible chance, you ought to try and do everything you can, because, unless you are unlucky, that should give you a better chance of achieving what your aim is.
You talk in the book about judgment and how judgment should be developed. So what is it that people can do to actually sharpen their judgment on a daily basis?
Well, look, I've got a list of, I think, 100 things in the book you can do related to each of the 6 elements that I've just described. So I just take at random 1 or 2 of these. If you think about the question of trust, if you think about a source, is the source reliable or not? Well, you can go off and get opinions about that. You go to the doctor says, well, this is my view. You think to yourself, well, I'm not sure. I would like a second opinion here. You know what I mean? So it's actually not necessarily assuming that all sources are just as good as all other sources, and developing your sense of trust, being open to the idea that some people are not as trustworthy as others, is one way in which you do that. I've got some other much more precise ways. Or, for example, in the question of your feelings and your beliefs. We've all got biases. There's nothing wrong with that, and we have to acknowledge that. What matters in making good judgments is you understand what your biases are and take account of them. So if, for example, you're endlessly optimistic, there's nothing wrong with that, but there's quite a lot wrong with it if you make ridiculously optimistic assumptions that you can do something. So you ought to be aware you're over-optimistic when you make a choice, and perhaps get somebody else who's slightly less optimistic than you, just to be part of the choice process. So you've actually thought things through and not just dismissed all the possible bad news. So there's a list of a lot of things you can do.
So one of the things that I've had people on here, I had someone who'd written a book about intuition and the fact that we should be using more intuition. What can we do? Because, sometimes we're always told that we need to follow the data. But you know as well as I do, we've been in a situation where our gut's basically saying, I think I should do this, or no, I don't think we should do this.
Well, look, I've looked at a lot of people who have written about intuition, and on the one hand, you've got somebody like Malcolm Gladwell in Blink,
Yep.
who very much is on the business of you go for the first thing that you hit on, as it were, and then at the other end with Danny Kahneman, thinking fast and slow. No, he says you ought to really think about things. Thinking slow is a very, very good idea to consider. And in between, there are many authorities about this. All right. My view in terms of judgment would be that the key element as far as intuition is concerned is, do you have experience of what it is you're about to make a judgment about? Because if you've done something 50 times already, then bluntly, doing it time number 51, unless it's in completely different circumstances, you can go with your intuition, because actually your intuition is all the accumulated knowledge and experience you've got. So that may be a very good guide. If you've never done something before, then actually intuition is going to be a pretty risky guide. You could go with it, but just simply to say, well, I'm not quite sure where this comes from, but I'll just go with my intuition. Frankly, that's a real risk. So for me, it's about the question of experience, but also, if I might add, if something doesn't matter very much, well, maybe, all right, you can go with your intuition. If it matters a lot, that's again adds to the risk.
And in your research, did you come up with anything in terms of generational or cultural differences in terms of judgment and how it's used?
Well, I was very conscious of the fact that, I'm living in the UK, I live a certain way of life and so on. Now, I can't say the whole world operates in exactly the same way, because clearly it doesn't. And there are big cultural differences around the world. But one of the advantages of being in the London Business School is that everything we do involves a credible number of people from many different countries.
Yeah.
And so I don't take just a British perspective. And actually, very carefully, I have gone around different parts of the world, testing things out. I mean, I'll give you one example. Japan and China are two cultures which are often seen as being very different to Western cultures, doing things in a different way. So I very carefully tested things out there. I went to somewhere like Argentina, where you have a very different way of looking at things, to test it out there. And everywhere I went, people said, yes, we go about things maybe in a different way, we think about things different ways, but what you're saying kind of makes sense within our culture, even in somewhere like Japan, where collective decisions are made in a very different way.
Because at the end of the day, I guess people need to make the right, or what is seen as the right decision, regardless of culture. And did you do anything in terms of generational? Because
well, look, I mean, in some respect, it's quite difficult to generalize, because we all know of people in their 20s who are old beyond their years, and there are people in their 20s who are also, frankly, not very interested in anything new, and so on and so on. So I find it quite difficult. I mean, the one thing I do believe about judgment is that on the whole, we get better at it, because we get more experience, we get more knowledge, we have more examples of things we've done in our lives. The great worry I have about people getting older is not that they are old, but they get, in some cases, overconfident or stuck in their ways. And that can be a killer, because that means you're falling back on things that actually are not relevant to the situations you're now in.
And what role does ethics play in good judgment? And what can we do in terms of letting short-term goals cloud our decisions?
Well, this is very much part of what I call the feelings and beliefs element of judgment. So just as we have biases, just as we have emotions and so on, we also have values and ethics, and they too inform the judgments that we've got. So we need to be aware of these when we're making our judgments. Are we aware of the kind of ethical implications of what we're about to do? And each of us will have our own mix of those that are relevant to the choices we're going to make.
And I thought I'd let you have a chance to talk about yourself.
Yeah.
So do you have any examples apart from the bookshop, in your great career in terms of where you've shown good judgment?
Okay, well, I'm not one to blow my own trumpet, but let me give you an example of another business which I was involved in. I started off a business which involved, it was also in books as it happened, which involved, it was kind of the Amazon of its day before the internet was invented and before Jeff
Oh, yeah,
Bezos.
you mentioned this, yeah.
Yeah. Anyway, and it was a good idea. The idea was basically people would pay extra if they got stuff quickly. And at that stage, before the internet, books came very slowly. 3 to 6 weeks was normal if they weren't in stock at a bookshop. And I said, look, there's got to be a market for people who want books quickly. And so I set up a business to do this. And it was about physical delivery. And, I thought actually this was a pretty good idea. Well, actually, it wasn't a pretty good idea because people were not prepared to pay. Okay. So I would argue it was a good idea to have a go at this. I don't regret that. I thought it was a good judgment to have a try. The mistake I made was that after 3 months, it was pretty clear this thing wouldn't succeed, but I couldn't bear to give it up, and I dragged it on for another year and wasted a lot of time trying to make something work that wouldn't work. So there you are. I thought, although it didn't succeed, I thought the original idea to start the bookshop and have a go was fine. Actually, the reality was I should have got out earlier.
And I do like in the book you sharing the stories of your business and your honest review of them. As you get older, you can look back on your life and tend to be a little bit more honest about the successes and the failures.
Yeah, look, I mean, I'm proud of a lot of what I've done. And for example, just give you an example, talking about blowing my own trumpet. All right, so I've worked in many different areas. I've moved from academic. I was in commercial life. I moved to academic life. I worked to government. I moved back to academic life. I moved back to government, and so on. And I've been involved. And I've taken quite a lot of risks on the way in order to get a more interesting life, get interesting experiences, and so on. And I'm rather proud of the fact that actually I seem to have made my way in quite a lot of different areas. So I thought, I've taken some risks and the risks have come off. Not everything has come off. You know what I mean? Some of the things were not successful, but I had a go at least. And I feel I'm pleased at least to have made judgments that involved taking a bit of risk, and getting as a result some very interesting experiences.
So how do you see AI impacting on judgment? Because as you said earlier on, it's very easy for us we're trying to come up with a decision to go to ChatGPT and ask it something.
Yeah.
But we're still approaching it with our biases and our blind spots and our so it may even give us the wrong answer, but let's assume it gives us the right answer. But it's still the answer probably that we want.
Yeah, look, I tend to spend a lot of time on ChatGPT. I'm sorry, not ChatGPT. I spend a lot of time on ChatGPT too, but I spend a lot of time on the question: can a machine exercise judgment? And it seems to me this is a really important issue for all of us, because bluntly, AI is going to take over a lot of routine jobs. The question is, if it can exercise judgment, it can take over a lot of sophisticated jobs as well. Now, my conclusion, based on a lot of work I've done, talking to a lot of people in the field, is that I think that a machine cannot exercise judgment. And it's one of the things that a human being will be left to do after AI is doing lots of things at the moment that human beings do. And that's great news, because actually, number one, it caters to our comparative advantage. And B, I reckon, therefore, everybody should get better at judgment.
And read your book, of course.
Well, it goes without saying.
Yeah. So in like 30 seconds that we've got left, is there anything that the people are watching that they can do to make their judgment better, apart from reading your book, of course?
Well, look, what I've tried to do is find something that's useful to people in making better choices. So my advice is think about judgment, whatever you do. I think it's really worth it because the stakes are high, folks. It's that, it's to your advantage. That's what I'd say.
Andrew, thank you so much for coming on and talking about your book, Judgment at Work, Making Better Choices. If I wanted to get a copy of this, where can I get it from?
It's on Amazon, discounted.
It's on Amazon, and
it's on Amazon, and they're selling it for less than the full price already.
Wow!
I know. There you are.
Roll up. And Andrew, if we wanted to get hold of you, best place is LinkedIn or your London Business School.
Absolutely, I'm on LinkedIn as well.
Yeah. And just so if your second name is spelt Likierman.
It is indeed.
Excellent. Andrew, thank you so much for coming on and talking about your book.